Good morning, everybody. It is a gray and rainy Wednesday, but it's 10 o'clock and it's time for 10 with Tim. My name is Tim Harris, pastor here at Woodburn Baptist Church. Most blessed man to be alive and also blessed just simply because of you and this opportunity every day to dig into the Word of God with you. We go verse by verse. And each day we just plug our way right through particular books of the Bible, and right now we're in the book of Genesis. We're in chapter 13, which is the separation of Abram and Lot. I'm glad that you're with me. I like this story a lot. I just be honest, again, I've been preaching 25, 26 years, and I've preached so many of these texts, but in this just sort of slow walking it through with you, I just feel like I'm going so much deeper. I'm getting so much more out of this, and this is one of those chapters that for me has just probably been a Sunday school lesson, but in reading through it this morning and with you, I feel like there's so much more here than I've ever seen. First off, when we begin in chapter 13, when Abram and Sarai now are leaving Egypt, there's this foreshadowing of the Exodus. Maybe you caught it yesterday, but it's just really sort of standing out to me today. Remember how, of course, Abram lied and said she was his sister, and then Pharaoh took her into his harem. Then he finds out it's his wife. I just love how it says the Lord sent terrible plagues upon Pharaoh back in chapter 12, verse 17. Again, foreshadowing there of the Exodus, but also call your attention today to the fact that when Abram and Sarai and Lot, of course, when they leave Egypt, they have so much wealth. Again, it's similar to the Exodus when the people of Egypt just give them the wealth, and send them on their way. There's a mention here of silver and gold. So where did Abram get silver and gold? Well, it says back there in verse 16 that, kind of like a dowry when Pharaoh was taking Sarai, as his wife, he just gave, Abram all of these, livestock and servants and silver and gold. And so when Abram and Sarai leave Egypt, they leave much more wealthy than they came in. Again, it's sort of a picture of the Exodus, if that makes any sense to you. It's also just this sign of the way that God's faithful to his promise. No matter what happens, nothing can thwart God's promise to bless Abram. And so you're just watching them begin to accumulate blessings and wealth. It doesn't mean that God's blessings are always, in material prosperity, but this is one of the signs here of God's faithfulness, just his accumulation of wealth, which brings us to his nephew Lot. Here in chapter 13, it sort of brings Lot back up, and this is where Lot becomes most important in the story here. Some say that Lot, as his nephew, maybe has been functioning, or maybe the assumption is Lot is Abram's heir at this moment in the story. At any rate, because of his association with Abram, Lot is blessed. He falls under this promise of protection and blessing. And so Lot finds himself, beginning to live a very different kind of blessed life because of his association with Abram. But that's about to change. So Abram and Lot both begin, their flocks are multiplying, their, caravans are expanding. There's just more and more people. It's just a sign that blessings can cause problems. Just kind of to state the obvious. God blesses, but now sometimes even just the blessings, God blesses us, and that can sometimes make life harder, not easier. Do you know what I'm saying? Because God's blessings, God's intention for us is always to grow us, to grow our faith, and not just to give us a comfortable life, So Abram and Lot here, even as they amass these blessings, which are just, realizing the very promises of God. I love how in verse 4, chapter 13, verse 4, Abram sort of backtracks. He's back now into the place between, Bethel and Ai, where he had worshiped before. There's just this way in which Abram just worships his way through life. He worships his way in this journey following the Lord, and I love that. But here he comes back to a place where he'd already built an altar. Now, there's not a lot said about that, but that speaks to me just the way in which he comes back and the altar's still there. You know, it sort of marks the path. And perhaps there are moments in your life where you're allowed to sort of return to a place where God spoke to you, return to a place where you have worshiped the Lord, and he finds that altar still there, which I just think is beautiful and amazing. But also, that altar standing there, I think, is a sign, it's a symbol of the fact that God's promises are still standing there. You know, God's promises endure. You may move. You may, you go through Egypt. I mean, you may go through all kinds of things. You have troubles and trials and problems, but God's promises stand. You know, he goes back to that place and the altar is still there and God's promises are still faithful. God is continuing to work out his promises. So, as I say, blessings can create problems. And so Abram and Lot come right down to it. Say, hey, it's getting hard. It's getting hard. Our farm hands are starting to argue. I can't tell one sheep from another. Why don't we give each other some space? Let's give each other some space. So Abram says, Lot, just look out there. You go left, I'll go right. You go east, I'll go west. But you decide. Look out. Figure out where you want to go, and I'll go the other way. Incidentally, this right here, what is it, verses 8 and 9, only the second recorded speech of Abram. I think that's interesting. The first time he talks, as I mentioned yesterday, I don't care much for it. It's when he's speaking out of insecurity, out of fear, telling Sarai to act like she's his sister. But here, it's a very different Abram that comes out here. This incredible generosity and this incredible, confidence? He's the one that has the promise from God, you know. But at the same time, he's just like, Lot, you just do what you're going to do. Go where you want to go, and I'll take the leftovers. I mean, that's what he says. You take what you want. You choose the direction you want. I'll go the other way. I just love that. It's that incredible confidence in the Lord. In other words, it doesn't matter what Lot decides. You know, God is going to bless Abram because God promised to bless Abram. And so Abram doesn't feel like anything Lot does or chooses can in any way thwart God's promise to bless him. You ever feel that way? Do you ever feel like somebody else in your life has the ability to cancel God's promise, God's calling on you? Because understand, they can't. They can't. There's nothing anybody can do that can in any way cancel God's promise to bless you, God's intention to bless you. And I love the way Abram just walks in that confidence. You know, Lot, you do what you're going to do, because honestly, Abram knows that he just lives under this promise, and so do you. So do you. Nobody can thwart God's plan and God's purpose to bless you. So Lot looks out, and again, there's this amazing drama here. Pay attention to what Lot looks at and what Abram looks at. You know, it ends up that Lot pitches his tents towards Sodom, as the King James says. Sodom and Gomorrah haven't been destroyed yet, but you're sort of given that foreshadowing here, which foreshadows Lot's choice. We know that anybody who pitches his tents towards Sodom is eventually going to be living in the city limits, and that's how sin works. Any decision you make that leads you one step closer to temptation, we can see where your life is headed, you know. And if you pitch your tents towards sin today, we just can count on the fact that tomorrow you're going to be living in the city limits. And that's sort of the way the story goes. But anyway, from there, it pulls back again to Abram, and God just reaffirms the promise. But not just reaffirms it, he expands it explicitly. It's no longer just go to the land I'll show you. Now it's Abram, just go walk. Go walk, because wherever you go, understand it's yours. I'm giving it all to you as far as your eyes can see. You know, it's no longer a place I'm going to show you. Now it's, you know, you're there. This is it. This is your home. This is a place where I'm going to bless you. Understand, it's a place God's going to bless him because it's, you know, God's going to bless him. It's not anything magical about the place, you know. It's the power of God. It wouldn't matter where God takes Abram because the blessing is going to come from God. But the land is beautiful, and Abram is there able to walk it. And notice it's only just going to make you a great nation. Now I'm going to make your descendants uncountable as grains of dust, grains of sand. Again, the promise grows, it expands, and the promise becomes more explicit. This is going to be a promise that's going to endure forever, So God blesses Abram's obedience. God blesses Abram's faith, and the blessing, the promise just continues to become more real and also more amazing. And that's exactly how God works. And that's how God's going to work for you too if you will walk in faith the way Abram walks in faith. I got to stop. Pick up right here tomorrow. Chapter 14, verses 1 to 24. Abram's going to have to save Lot's sorry behind, and that's tomorrow. The story gets so good. So read ahead. Stay with me. Listen, stay in. We don't know what this crazy weather's going to do, but we know what God's going to do. He's going to be good to us. So keep your eyes on him today. I love you all. Tomorrow, chapter 14, verses 1 to 24, 10 o'clock, Lord willing. I will see you then. I love you guys. Have a good